Hello and welcome to the Stardog Academy training on JavaScript. This is Greg Clooney, one of the senior software engineers at Stardog. To let you know a little bit more about me, I lead the effort for NASA's Data Integration Integrated Technical Team to eliminate data silos and enable information sharing across the enterprise. I've been developing code for over 20 years and currently help NASA gather and solve their complex data problems using Stardog for the upcoming Artemis missions. Today I'm going to walk through how you can use JavaScript to connect to and query Stardog. In this training session, you will learn how to install the Stardog.js npm package and review what is in the package, connect to Stardog and create a database, use the JavaScript API to make calls to Stardog in order to do things like database administration and query execution, discuss frameworks associated with Stardog.js and how to implement. Let's get started. This section is about introducing you to Stardog.js. Stardog.js wraps all the functionality of a client for the Stardog DBMS and provides access to a full set of functions such as executing Sparkle queries, administrative tasks on Stardog, and the use of the Reasoning API. All the implementation uses the HTTP protocol since most of Stardog functionality is available using this protocol. For more information, go to the Stardog's HTTP programming documentation. This is a universal library and as such can be used in both the browser and Node.js. There are two official versions of Stardog.js, version 2.0 which supports Stardog 6.x and version 3.0 which supports Stardog 7.x. The current maintained release is version 3.0. Since version 2.0 works with Stardog 6 and support for Stardog 6 has ended, if you try to install a version below 3.0, you'll see a deprecation notice. In order to use Stardog.js, you will need access to a running instance of Stardog, local or remote. You can follow the installation and setup instructions tutorial to help install a local version of Stardog. In typical NPM environments, the command to install Stardog.js would be npm install Stardog. If not using npm, a direct reference in an HTML script element can be used. As previously stated, Stardog.js wraps all the functionality of a client for the Stardog DBMS. TypeScript definitions are available for the API. Some of the more frequently used APIs are database creation or drop, transaction begin or commit, and query execution. This concludes the section on introducing you to Stardog.js. This section is about looking at examples of Stardog.js. In this example, we are going to create a connection to Stardog. Below is an example of making a constant that allows you to communicate with the Stardog server. This will be used in follow-on code examples. In the code snippet, we set the username, the password, and the endpoint of the Stardog server. In this example, we will be creating and populating a database. For this example, we will use the music database and the Beatles turtle file located within Stardog's GitHub repository. The example will create a new database with data, so used namespaces will be loaded along with the data. Let's look at the code to create and populate a database. In the code snippet, we will use an await and call the Stardog.js DB create method, passing in the connection we talked about before, the name of the database, which in this case is music, and the file that contains the data. We will wait for the response from the database. If the response is not a 201, it means there was an error and we will print out the error message. If the response was a 201, it means the database was successfully created. Once the database has been created, we will then start a transaction. In order to do the transaction, we will call Stardog.js DB transaction begin and pass in the connection and the database name. Once the transaction has been created, we will start adding data. We do this by calling Stardog.js DB add using the connection, the name of the database, the transaction ID, and the data that we would like to add. Once the data has been loaded, we will commit the transaction calling Stardog.js DB transaction commit, passing in the connection, the music, and the transaction ID. In this example, we will be dropping a database. In the code snippet, we use an await and call the Stardog.js DB drop method, passing in the connection and the database we would like to drop. If the response is not a 200, we will print out the error message. If the response is a 200, it means that Stardog successfully dropped the database. In this example, we query the database using our connection against the music database. We pass the query a parameter to set the reasoning to false and the songwriter variable that will be inserted into the query. If the query is successful, we handle the response. If not, we handle the error. In this code snippet, we create a query string. This is the string that we'll use to query the database. You can see that we have $singer inside of the string. This will be set by the Stardog.js query execute command. Below the query string is the await followed by the Stardog.js query execute command that passes in the connection, the music database name, the query string, header information, and then additional parameters to set the reasoning to false and the singer to David Bowie. If the response was a 200, it means the query was successful and we print out the query results. In this example, we query the database using GraphQL against the music database. We pass the query an additional parameter to set the reasoning to true. If the query is successful, we handle the response. If not, we handle the error. We do not have to set the response type with GraphQL as it defaults to JSON. In this code snippet, we set the query string with a GraphQL query. We again have the singer variable set inside of the query string. We use await and Stardog.js query.graphql execute method, passing in the connection, the music database name, the query string. We set the reasoning to false, and we set the parameter of the singer to David Bowie. If the response is not a 200, we log the error. If the response is a 200, it means the query was successfully ran and display the query results. This concludes the section on looking at examples of Stardog.js. This section is about using frameworks with Stardog.js. A popular framework to use with Stardog.js is React. We have a tutorial on how to use React with Stardog at one of our repos. The next slides will highlight some of the areas we previously talked about and how they are used in the tutorial. We will now look at how to create a connection using React. The tutorial creates a constants.js file that contains the connection information as well as a response checker. The connection tells Stardog.js what Stardog server to connect to, while the response checker checks to see if the call was successful or not. At the top of the file, you must import the Stardog package by adding const connection equals require Stardog. On the left, you can see how we build the connection, and on the right is the response checker. We will now look at loading data with React. The tutorial creates a loaddata.js file that loads the data into a database. The file is passed the variables from the previous slide to make the connection and check the response. You can see that we pull in the query and the DB from the Stardog package, the connection and the DB name from the helpers constants file, and the checker from the helpers wrap with rescheck file. The data is read in from the data.ttl file. The query is created. We create a log successful and a log failure constant. And when we go to load the database, we call the create method, passing in the connection, the database name. Then we check the response of the query.execute command that also passes in the connection, the DB name, and the query to run. If it's successful, we log the log successful constant. If it is a failure, we catch the log failure. Finally, we will look at how you will call a query and update the state based upon the response. The component didMount method calls the refreshData method. Inside the refreshData method, we set the state of the table to loading. We call the query.execute command, passing in the connection, the database name, and the read query. If the query fails, we set the table state to failed. If the query is successful, we read the information out of the body, pass the body to the table, and set the state of the table to loaded, and add the result set. Another popular framework to use with Stardog.js is D3. We have a tutorial on how to create visualizations with D3 in our GitHub repo. The tutorial is created using both React and D3, so the code fragments that we applied in the React segment apply here. We also use a beta version of Stardog D3.js in order to interact with D3. Here is an example of a query that will populate the nodes and edges variables that will be passed to D3. In the component.didUpdate method, we first check to see if we should update. If we do, we set the edges loading and nodes loading to true. Following, we perform our query. Once the query has been performed and the edges loading and nodes loading is set to false, we pull the information from the nodes and edges and set to viz data. With the viz data created, we send that to Stardog D3 and it will update the visualization. Here's an example of an application that uses D3 with Stardog. In the application, you can see the nodes and how they're connected by edges. This was created using Sparkle queries against Stardog and passing that information to the D3 framework. This concludes the section on using frameworks with Stardog.js. That concludes the Stardog Academy training on JavaScript. Using JavaScript to access and use Stardog Server, we reviewed how to install the Stardog.js npm package and review what is in the package, connect to Stardog and create a database, use the JavaScript API to make calls to Stardog in order to do things like database administration and query execution, discuss frameworks associated with Stardog.js and how to implement. Thanks for following along. If you have any questions, please review our frequently asked questions page or head to docs.stardog.com for additional information.